I've stood on so many stages. I was on the road for 200 days a year, and I've said so many times, I'm grateful to be here. I'm honored to be here. And I meant it. I thought I meant it, but I did not know what those words meant until I came back 3 weeks ago and tonight. The experience of being together and getting to talk about the most important thing in my life. Bryn is right. Although they say messianic, I don't know. But it is. I do approach it religiously or spiritually, and getting to be in this room with you. I have to tell you, I didn't know if it would ever happen again. I actually don't know if it will ever happen again after this, but I do know that tonight, it's everything. So thank you for being here. And Bryn didn't lightly touch on the fact that 5 years ago, I was hit by the bomb that's called canceled, and I was thrown under my desk. I was vomiting and shaking and crying and self-pitying and scared, and a type of fear I did not know. I'm a brave woman, and I did not know that kind of terror existed. My phone overnight went from 2,400 people to 40 people. And, my agent at the time said I wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole. And I did not know what it meant to be an untouchable human being. And then I did. And then there were some people, my teachers, some guides, and some really rare and fierce friends who said, get up, come on. We're going to do the science, you're going to write the books, and we're going to make sure that what people don't understand is made clear in a way that they can understand it. And from that place, I don't know if you can imagine, it was years of that state and writing and talking to scientists. And, Vivian, who's in that video, and Nicole are both in this room tonight. And I don't know if you can imagine 20 years ago walking into an office and saying to somebody, oh yes, I understand you're a researcher, and I have a feeling we have a groundbreaking protocol. Okay, it involves a clitoris. And there was no way. And the only thing they were interested in was climax. And I kept saying, yeah, well, that actually isn't a part of this. And then they were only interested in the pathology. And I would say, oh, no, actually, it's a nonlinear approach to healing. And and you just need to know, you just need to know that both Vivian and Nicole, dared to go where no man had gone before. and Nicole actually conducted the first study since Masters and Johnson, partnered stimulation study since Masters and Johnson. That's in the 50s. That was the last time we viewed any kind of impulse of arousal as something other than a pathology. And that we did this study with more than 230 people. Nicole said that may never happen again now that we've had COVID, that something of that size may never happen. So deep, deep bow to you. And I am here tonight as a result. Truly, I cannot tell you how truly this is of the people who put me back together. And, I didn't know if I ever wanted to come out again. It's a lot to face after you read things. Somebody inadvertently once sent me an article, and it just said Messianic cult leader, about me. And and I didn't know if I could do it, but I do know that those people who got me back up, I at least owe I owe this to you. So tonight, because of them, these friends, I'm here. So that article that took me down, I hope that we someday have different language for these experiences, because truly it ended up being one of the deepest spiritual experiences of my life. But it turned into like a California wildfire, and that became what we loosely call a documentary. And I can tell you that I watched it, and I was eating my popcorn, I was watching it, and I was thinking like, that
bitch.
Well, no, actually I was thinking like, that woman, she is badass. Who is that? Look at her, go girl. Either in the first half, I'm just watching, oh, look at that, amazing, incredible. And then all of a sudden I realized that, wait a minute, I think this is supposed to be about me. Nothing to do with me. And the thing about it is that, I am a wild woman. I am a free woman. I am a free woman, and as such, there is no lack of material that they could have used if they wanted an interesting documentary. Here I am, I'm this woman. I lived in an orgasm monastery. My clitoris was stroked for hours a day. I can tell you with the greatest nuance, a quarter of an eighth of a tenth of an inch, you move, and then all of a sudden this pocket of consciousness opens, like, that's interesting. Or I lived in an acid house. I have ingested copious amounts of LSD. I am more fluent probably in that world than I am in this world. Then there's the whole other woman thing, right? Because I spent 20 years with people very, very concerned about my appearance. That's one of the things that happens when you're in the front of a room. So my dresses were too short, they were too long. I'm too tall, I should wear heels, I should wear flats. My hair should be brown, my hair should be blonde. I don't know about that makeup. Well, they could have even reported on the fact that I used some Botox, I used a little Juvederm, I had my breasts done by Dr. Teitelbaum, thank you. We call him Dr. Titty Bomb around my house. And he's here in LA if anybody's looking. Anyway, and then I'll get 14 comments on my Instagram, but don't you believe that women should be beautiful the way they are? I say we're art. We're art, and we can design ourselves however we wish to. Anyway, that is the woman that they could have covered, but instead they chose the more predictable story, right? The cult leader corrupted by money and power. I just want to say that's patently not true. And you can determine for yourself, of course. But like I said, I'm a free woman. And as a free woman, there is nothing more than I want than every single human being on the planet to be free. Okay, so there's the house cleaning portion of the evening. I'm going to empty the elephant out of the room. And I can tell you that I got in all the trouble that I got in because I was sitting where you're sitting 25 years ago. And I had met a guy. And, he had the tattoo sleeves, and he had read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and he passed my extensive security check, and he put his hand on the small of my back, and he invited me to a demonstration of a woman in orgasm. I had no idea what this was. I just knew that I was going to this demonstration of orgasm with this man. My version was in San Francisco, and it was in the Richmond district of San Francisco. It was a beautiful, beautiful house. It was taupe walls, hurricanes on the side filled with cylindrical candles, warm cream color, the dark brown curtains. There was a Gustav Klimt painting above the fireplace. And in front of me, there was a massage table. And there were two women on either side. And these women were almost otherworldly. They were so poised, almost like ballerinas. They were wearing dresses like Diane von Furstenberg type wrap dresses, and they had the short hair. It was at the time of Sharon Stone, so 3 of them had short hair, 1 had a bob. But these women were so different. See, I was in San Francisco. I was teaching. I was a graduate teaching associate in women's studies at San Francisco State. And so I was the whole thing. I was postmodern feminist deconstructionist lesbian. Did you not know this? And I had on my U.S. out of my uterus T-shirt and my Take Back the Night placard where I marched without a shirt on, and my titties were smaller then. And I was a serious feminist, and it's important that you know that, because that was who I was entering that room, and that was not who I was when I left that room. I left that room a very different person. So there I was. There were these women, and then all of a sudden in walked a man. And he was kind of rogue. He was a little bit like Jack Nicholson, curly, tousled hair. He had on jeans, nicely fitted, brown loafer shoes. And I could not figure out which woman I was going to be, if I was going to be the feminist or the woman, because the feminist would have just punched him. But the woman had other ideas. I was saved from that question because in walked one of the most breathtaking women I had ever witnessed in my life, and not solely for her physical beauty. She had kind of Catherine Deneuve cheeks and blonde hair, brushed back, a translucent skin. But there was something that emanated from her. She had on a gold robe and this chocolate collar. And the 2 of them stood in front of each other, and they were doing something called a heat exercise, which made no sense to me. And they sounded like the Peanuts. Wah, 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 wah. I couldn't, it was way too much for me to be taking in. And the next thing I knew, she was walking over, she was taking off her robe, and then she mounted that table that was with a perfectly ironed sheet on top of it. She mounted the table. And he walked over and he said, just notice. That's all you have to do tonight is just notice. Notice. She may have a flush in her cheeks. She may have swelling. She may have a pool of ejaculate. You may notice some shivering, the activation of the involuntary musculature. Just do your best to notice. And notice what she looks like now, because she may look different at the end. Okay. She laid back. He put his thumb in her introitus. That's where, if you were going to have intercourse, that spot there, and he began to stroke. And I was doing a great job. I was noticing. I just kept noticing. I was noticing, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if you've ever seen the Dolby ad with the sonic boom. But he's clinging for dear life to the armchair. Well, there were no arms on my chair, but I was still clinging. And I was hit with a blast. But the blast was a clarity unlike anything I had ever known, except I'm not really much of a hiker, but I did go hiking one time on the very low mountain of Calaveras, and there had been a snow, and I remember that feeling of taking in this pristine air. It was so clear. My head was clear. I wasn't thinking about myself at all. It was immersed in eternal space. I felt connected to everything. That's how I felt in that room, in that moment. It was totally clear. Not a single thought. Nothing. And then, boom, I was back. And there I was judging, I was comparing, I was fixing. I had determined that these women didn't actually have the kind of feminist power. I wanted to throw my jacket over this woman. I wanted to tell her that she did not need to be exploited in that way for the male gaze. And then, I got hit again. And this time, I was transfixed. I was doing more than noticing. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away. I couldn't move my head, but I could see out of the corner of my eye that all of us seemed to be in the same state, and all of us were moving in unison. There was this connection in the room, and all of us were totally moved and possessed by this woman who was doing absolutely nothing. All she was doing was being completely vulnerable. And it struck me, wait a minute, I think that is feminine power. It's not this fight for my rights. That's what it looks like. There's a term, duende, and it's used in flamenco dance. So the young flamenco dancers are very passionate, very dramatic. But as they get more and more seasoned, they pick up more and more duende. And then they can just barely move an eyelash, and the whole room moves. And it struck me. That's never been an example I've seen in the world of power. But clearly it is. I remember in that moment I thought, that's the kind of power I want. I want that power where it comes from my vulnerability, almost like gravity, to move the world around me, rather than punching my way up or down. But I also knew in that moment, I'm a smart woman, that's dangerous. It's dangerous to carry that kind of power, because that is real power. That's not me pretending to have your kind of power. That's me having my kind of power. So, good news is I went unconscious again. I was totally out. Now, I forgot to tell you that I was wearing a Norma Kamali onesie jumpsuit, leopard print, with some platform shoes in my Jennifer Aniston hair. And suddenly it struck me that I looked really, really tacky. And that these women looked so elegant and poised. And I became so painfully self-conscious. I could feel the rolls in my stomach. I could feel, I'm 5'10", and these women were like, I don't know. They were not 5'10". They were so petite, and I was so full. And but it didn't occur that way in my head. I was just this huge, like Shrek or something, and they were like breakfast at Tiffany's, and it was awful, the comparison. And of course, I'm looking to see my dates, looking at them, and it was, and then I got hit again. This was the last hit, but this one really knocked me out, because what struck me was, oh, wait a minute. I think that's what sex is supposed to be. I think that clear energy that clarifies, that heals, that isn't a big show, and that isn't about me transacting in some way. See, my sexuality at that time was about what I could get. It was about, I could get out of a ticket, I could get a better grade, I could get, a role in a play, I could get a boyfriend or a husband or a girlfriend or a baby or a dishwasher. I could get, really, I had some good currency with it, and that's pretty much how I looked at it. And suddenly it struck me, because I was teaching women's studies, that I looked at sexuality the exact same way the books that I was passing out to these young women said men looked at women. You get it? I was treating sexuality like it was a second-class citizen that I used for my own purposes. That was enough. I was done. I was out for the rest of the thing. And then all of a sudden, the next thing I knew, she sat up. And when she sat up, he was right. She did look different. She was already stunning. But when she sat up, she was more light, than woman. And I just remember thinking, I don't know how she does that, but that's what I want to do. That's who I want to be. And then I set forth to years and years of practice, and we know the rest from there. So there's a term, one of my favorite teachers, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, wrote a book called Spiritual Materialism. And in it, what he talks about is this idea of spiritual materialism. So the idea is we have an ego. I'm just going to use that word as a placeholder for self-cherishing, self-identification. We have an ego. Freedom, happiness, joy, liberation, they all happen when that ego dissolves. You know that place where there is no internal chatter, there is no sense of self, there's a feeling of being connected? Okay. The ego can co-opt just about anything, including the spirituality that's there to dissolve it for its own purposes, to fortify it. So we have all seen these people, some of us have been these people at various points, who wear the mala beads, and they wear the shawl, and they have the bindi, and they are so put together, and their language is so mindful. And they are here to make a suggestion about how you might do it better when you're in your spiritual practice and crying and snotty and under a table and vomiting. They know. That's a form of spiritual materialism. What struck me is that at least we have an idea of what real spirituality looks like. But I don't know that we have an idea of what real sexuality looks like. See, I think we have a kind of sexual materialism. We know it is red teddies, him pleasing her, her pleasing him, jade eggs and vibrators and whips and the whole gamut. And those things might be amazing. I don't know. I mean, I do know. But I know quite well, frankly. But that's not what I'm talking about tonight. That's actually not what I'm talking about tonight. All of those are over there. You know, John Perry Barlow says there's the difference between love and true love is the difference between a very large number and infinity. And for me, the difference between sex and Om is the difference between a very large number and infinity. It opens into a kind of infinity. It liberates you of the mind that's keeping track. So there I was, and I had begun to study, and we built one taste. The whole thing happened. You know, this idea, it used to be weaving orgasm into the world, conversation is what we said, but then I said orgasm, and everyone could only imagine climax, so I had to change the word. And then it all came crashing down. And there I was left with this question. See, because I have seen 30,000 people go through the doors. I have seen this healing. I have experienced this healing for myself. I did know the science was coming out. So there was this question I was left with, and I'll ask you. If you knew you had a kind of medicine, but that medicine was surrounded with a fear and a loathing and a hatred that jeopardized your life, what would you do? See, in the turn of the century, the yogis came, but they were viewed as dark hypnotists who were here to steal the women. But they felt they had something powerful and healing. And so, today, 1 out of every 3 people in the United States has done yoga. And it's one of the top protocols that's non-pharmaceutical, that's prescribed by physicians. Researchers used to give academics psilocybin. Those researchers were run out of town, they lost their post, they were vilified, Some were investigated. Some were put in prison. Some are in prison today. And do you know that that same government that did that is in this moment, through the U.S. Bureau of Veterans Affairs, conducting studies on the effects of psilocybin on PTSD in veterans? That same government is conducting studies through the FDA on the effects of psilocybin on alcohol abuse. So then, mindfulness enters, just sweet mindfulness, through the form of Buddhism. And these Buddhist teachers were considered at that time cult leaders. They were considered brainwashing their students. My favorite, well, my teacher's my favorite, but my second favorite teacher, Trungpa, was actually run out of the country. And yet, today, 90% of all med students are trained in some form of mindfulness to offer to their patients. There's an app that goes out to 2,300 businesses to fundamentally change business at the foundation in order to offer mindfulness and to shift the culture altogether. So we had the science. We also have, there's 5 peer-reviewed papers. I think everyone gets a paper tonight. There's 5 peer-reviewed papers, 3 that are in review, 5 studies that are in IRB review right now. A new trauma study is starting in Boston with Dan, who you saw on the screen. We gave you some of the findings in that. I'm just going to give you one more, and that is that one of the most exciting things that Dr. Andrew Newberg, who's considered one of the top 3 neuroscientists in the world, found, and this is one of our next studies because this was shocking, is that there may be permanent brain changes as a result of Om. They only find this in 30-year practitioners of meditation and, oddly, vegans. But these changes turn a person toward joy, turn a person toward resilience. So the same amygdala that we know when we hear about trauma is inducing these ruminating thoughts can also be retrained and repurposed for joy. What we're finding is, and this is the thing that I think got lost in translation, is that healing is not a direct process. Healing is a result of entering into a mystical state. And then you come out of the mystical state, and as a byproduct, healing occurred. You do some psilocybin, depression is decreased, anxiety is decreased, trauma overall is decreased. So I knew this. And when you have a question, I don't know about you, but I go home. My home happens to be in Eros, Sicily. Shout out. Shout out to the Sicilians. There's this joke, I don't know if you've ever heard it. How do you know someone's a vegan or if they do CrossFit? And they say, they tell you. And the same is true. the same is true for Sicilians. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's because I'm Sicilian. So anyway, I'm from Sicily. And it happens to be the most beautiful place in the world. And I think even if you weren't Sicilian, you might agree with me. So it's this mountain. And the mountain, I don't know if they're going to have a shot, but the mountain is a spiral. And there's rocks around the entire mountain. And so you drive up and you go around this spiral. And then you park your car. And when you park your car, you get out and there's another spiral. And so you walk around that. And there's these kind of restored mini churches that occur in Sicily. They're like, oh, you had a cannoli, you need to go to church. Oh, you bought a dress, you need to go to church. So it's like every 3 doors are these beautiful, beautiful restored churches. Dark pews, brick floors. The utmost care is put into the restoration of these churches. You walk around. And then you walk over here. When you walk over here, you see the ocean. When you see the ocean, it's deep, deep, deep blue. Across the way is Africa. You walk down a set of stairs and you enter what can only be called ruins. Literal ruins, where there's stones. There you go. Where there's stones, but most of it is dilapidated. And then you see that sign there? What that sign says is, "Welcome to the Temple of Venus." What prayer was to the Catholic priest, sexual rights were to the priestess. The word kadosh was what was used for these women. Kadosh means holy. It was translated by the priest to be prostitute. So that table, obviously, is not an original, but that's where the rites were held. I can't see a table and not get on it. So I did. And I laid there and I imagined, what would it be like if we restored this building with that much care? What was it like when it was filled, when it was brimming with these women bringing this healing, when people were coming in for healing? I just imagined this world. It was very similar to my first demo, but it was so full. It was so sufficient. It was so nourished. Everything that we think to be grabbing and transgressive is a hunger. But I imagined that hunger being fed, and I was lying there. And I had my question with me. And then I had my answer. No matter what the cost, I had to come back. I had to do the science. I had to write the books. And because of my friends, I had to come back here.